family of 14 executed in front of their mother. A Christian father and son gunned down at a checkpoint. These aren't just headlines. This is the horrifying reality for civilians caught in the crossfire in Syria. Welcome to Vibe and Voice.
Yeah.
Where we try to cut through the noise and figure out what's really going on.
Absolutely.
It's been, just 3 months since the fall of Bashar al-Assad? And you'd think Syria would be breathing a sigh of relief, but instead, the country is teetering on the brink of another civil war. And we're going to try to delve into reports of massacres and this complex web of actors that are involved. And this peace that just seems so fragile.
It really is. And what's striking, I think, is just how fast this violence has escalated. Just days after that initial attack in Jabla on March 6th, we're seeing a death toll exceeding 1,000.
Wow.
There are disturbing reports of mass graves and potential massacres. This isn't just some isolated incidents. This is pointing to a coordinated effort to destabilize the region.
And it's not just about the numbers, right? I mean, the sources that we've got here paint a really chilling picture of the brutality. One account describes Syrian security forces forcing captives to denounce their faith before executing them. It's hard to grasp the level of dehumanization that's going on here.
It's a chilling reminder, I think, of the dark side of human nature. How easily hatred and fear can be manipulated to incite violence.
Yeah.
This incident, forcing people to renounce their faith before they're executed, that speaks volumes about the sectarian tensions that are fueling this conflict. This isn't just about political power. This is about deep-rooted religious and ethnic divisions that are being exploited.
You mentioned the attack in Jabla. What made this city such a flashpoint?
Well, the Jabla is located in the province of Latakia, which, along with Tartus, is considered an Alawite stronghold. And remember, the Assad regime had deep ties with the Alawite community. So after Assad fell, there was palpable fear of retribution within that community. And this attack in Jabla, which targeted symbols of the new government, it was like a spark that ignited this powder keg.
So we've got pro-Assad loyalists, fueled by this fear and resentment, lashing out against the new government. But who is orchestrating this? The Syrian government's claiming that it's just rogue elements within the security forces, but looking at the scale and coordination of these attacks, it's hard to believe that's the whole story.
Yeah, it does seem like there's something more, right? That level of organization really suggests a more sophisticated command structure. And one name that keeps popping up is Salah al-Hassan.
Okay.
He was Assad's favored general, known for his ruthlessness and effectiveness during the civil war. Many believe he's gone underground and is orchestrating this insurgency.
So we have this guy, Salah al-Hassan, potentially pulling the strings, but it's not just former military, right? These sources describe a real chaotic mix of players, civilian mobs, militias. There are even whispers of foreign fighters joining in. How can anyone hope to establish peace in such a fragmented and volatile environment?
That's the million-dollar question. That complexity is a major obstacle to achieving any kind of lasting peace.
Right.
How do you build trust and accountability when you can't even be sure who is responsible for the violence?
It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And speaking of complexity, let's not forget the Syrian transitional government. They're in a really tough spot trying to balance these calls for justice against the need for reconciliation. How are they responding to this escalating crisis?
Well, so far, the response has been underwhelming. They've issued statements condemning the violence. They're blaming rogue elements. They're promising investigations.
Yep.
But their words ring hollow when the violence continues unabated.
But how much control do they realistically have? We're talking about a country that's been ravaged by war for years with these deep-seated divisions and a security apparatus that's likely riddled with loyalties to the old regime. Can we really expect them to wave a magic wand and just restore order?
It's a tall order, there's no doubt about it. And their actions so far haven't inspired much confidence.
Right.
For example, they've been really slow to deploy troops to protect vulnerable communities. And there are credible reports of security forces either participating in or turning a blind eye to the violence. This lack of decisive action is just fueling this distrust and feeding this narrative from the pro-Assad loyalists.
It's just this vicious cycle, right?
It is.
The violence breeds distrust, which in turn fuels more violence.
Yeah.
And caught in the middle of all of this are these ordinary Syrians desperately just trying to survive.
Yeah.
We already mentioned those horrific accounts of the family murdered in Latakia and the Christian father and son killed at the checkpoint. These personal stories bring home the human cost of this conflict
in
a way that statistics just never can.
You're absolutely right. And it's important to remember that those are just two of the countless stories of suffering and loss. For every incident that makes headlines, there are countless others that go unreported.
Right.
Families shattered, lives uprooted, futures stolen.
It's easy to get caught up in the political machinations and the strategic analysis, but we can't lose sight of the individuals whose lives are being torn apart by this violence.
No, you can't. You're absolutely right. Behind every headline, behind every statistic, there's a human face, there's a story of pain and resilience. And those stories need to be heard. They need to inform our understanding of what's at stake in Syria.
So we've laid out this grim reality, escalating violence, a government struggling to assert control, and a deeply traumatized population. But what does this all mean for Syria's future? Is there any hope for peace? We're going to explore those questions in part 2.
Welcome back to Vibe and Voice. Before we, jump back in, I think we should just acknowledge the weight of the situation in Syria. I mean, the images, the stories, they paint a very stark picture of a nation on edge.
Yeah, no, it's heavy stuff for sure. So we've established that Syria is basically a powder keg right now. This recent violence in the northwest is a grim warning. But where do we go from here? I mean, can this fragile peace hold, or are we looking at like a full-blown civil war 2.0?
Well, the sources we've looked at offer a range of perspectives. Some analysts think that this wave of violence might just burn itself out, especially if the pro-Assad loyalists can't get the resources or the widespread support they need to sustain a long insurgency.
That makes sense. But, you mentioned Salah al-Hassan, Assad's former general, maybe orchestrating this uprising. If he's involved, wouldn't that make a protracted conflict more likely? I mean, the guy is a seasoned military strategist. He's got a track record.
Well, yeah, that's the wild card here. If al-Hassan can tap into that fear and resentment within the Alawite community and maybe even secure some external funding from people who were sympathetic to the old regime, then yeah, a long and bloody insurgency is a real possibility.
It's a chilling thought. And it's not just about organized military forces either, is it? We've got these militias, civilian mobs, even rumors of foreign fighters. It seems like every time the situation starts to stabilize, somebody else enters the scene and throws a wrench in the works.
Exactly. And that lack of clear structure makes containment really difficult. It's like trying to put out a fire that keeps flaring up in different places. And it creates this breeding ground for extremism, too. In an environment like that, groups like ISIS could easily exploit the situation, destabilize the country even more.
It's a nightmare scenario. Speaking of adding fuel to the fire, what role is the international community playing in all this? Are they trying to stabilize the situation, or are they just sitting back and watching?
Well, so far the response has been, I'd say, lukewarm at best. There's a sense of fatigue, which is understandable after years of involvement in the Syrian conflict. But inaction could have really bad consequences. A failed state in Syria would create a vacuum that could be filled by extremist groups.
And wouldn't that risk drawing in regional powers and leading to a wider conflict? It's like a domino effect. One wrong move and the whole region could go up in flames.
Exactly. The stakes are incredibly high, not just for Syria, but for the whole Middle East. And that's why the international community's response is so important. They have a responsibility to act, to use their influence, and to pressure all sides to protect civilians.
So it seems like Syria's at a crossroads. One path, however improbable, leads toward some kind of peace. The other, a descent back into civil war with all the horrors that come with it.
And even in the best case scenario, the challenges facing Syria are immense. I mean, years of conflict have left the country deeply divided. Weak institutions, a shattered economy, a population that's been traumatized by violence. Rebuilding Syria, both physically and psychologically, will be a huge task.
Daunting to even think about. And in the middle of all the geopolitics and talk of rebuilding, we can't forget the human cost. Millions displaced, countless lives lost, a generation scarred by war.
We have to remember that behind all the statistics and analysis are real people, with hopes, dreams, fears. We've heard their stories. The family in Latakia, the Christian father and son, the young women held hostage. Each one a testament to resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering.
Their stories are a reminder that peace isn't just about signing treaties or establishing new governments. It's about creating a society where everyone feels safe, respected, valued, regardless of faith, ethnicity, or political affiliation.
And that's a vision worth fighting for. A vision that requires not just political will, but a fundamental shift in mindset, a rejection of hatred and division, a commitment to building a future where all Syrians can live together in peace and dignity.
Welcome back to Vibe and Voice. We've been talking about this very concerning situation in Syria, a nation that's really grappling with the possibility of another civil war.
And we've looked at the violence, the different groups involved, that fragile peace, and the threat of this conflict going on for a long time. But it's important to remember, in the middle of all the geopolitics and predictions, there are real people whose lives are on the line.
You know, one thing that really stood out to me as we were going through these sources is this feeling of fear and uncertainty, particularly among Syria's Christians. You can almost feel their anxiety in what they're saying.
Oh yeah, that fear is definitely there. Imagine being told at a checkpoint, "You're next." I mean, that's the reality for some Christians in Syria right now.
It's heartbreaking. They've already been through so much during the war, and now they might become scapegoats in this new wave of violence. That story of the Christian father and son killed at a checkpoint, just trying to get away from the fighting, that really highlights the danger.
And it's not just physical violence they're afraid of either. There are reports of Christians' homes being looted, their property taken, their right to even be in the country being questioned. It's a very unsettling situation.
It's like a scary repeat of what's happened to other minorities in the region. Makes you wonder what will happen to Syria's Christians if this violence keeps getting worse.
It's really uncertain. Some are leaving, trying to find safety in nearby countries or areas within Syria that seem safer. Others are staying, holding on to hope, wanting to stay in the land of their ancestors.
It shows how resilient they are, but it's also a sad reflection of this situation that they have to make these impossible choices. Leave everything behind or stay and face a dangerous and uncertain future?
It really shows how urgent it is to find a solution to this conflict, a lasting peace that protects all Syrians, no matter their religion or ethnicity.
And that brings us back to who's responsible. Who's going to step up and make sure these vulnerable communities are safe? The transitional government has said they will, but their power seems shaky, and their actions don't always match their words.
I think it's good to be skeptical. The international community has a big role to play, too. They can't just watch while these terrible things are happening. They need to use their influence, pressure all sides to protect civilians, uphold human rights, and really work towards a peaceful solution.
Because at the end of the day, peace in Syria won't come from military force alone. It needs a commitment to justice, reconciliation, building a future where all Syrians can live together peacefully and with dignity.
And that future starts by recognizing the suffering of those who have been pushed aside and silenced, those whose stories have been lost in all the chaos of war. Their voices need to be heard, their pain recognized, and their hopes for a better future supported.
So as we wrap up this look at the crisis in Syria, we want to challenge you. Don't let the complexity of the situation overwhelm you. Don't ignore the difficult things we've learned. Stay informed, have thoughtful conversations, and demand action from those in power.
The future of Syria, the fate of its people, is hanging in the balance. It's up to all of us to do our part to make sure peace wins and hope has the last word.
Thanks for joining us on Vibe and Voice. As always, seek the truth, like, comment, and subscribe.